Today, we have a new topic, Amazon's recommender system. But before we get into that, I would like to mention some stuff about PackBack because I'm starting to get inquiries from students who will surely be disappointed. Okay, so remember with PackBack, you can earn up to 15 points per week and 130 points for the semester, right? That's the cap. Now, that means if you start as late as week 7, you can get 9 times 15 points equals 135 points, which is greater than the 130 points for the semester, right? So even if you haven't started and you don't plan on starting this week, as long as you start by next week, you can potentially get the full extra credit points, right? Likewise, if you start as late as week 9, you can get 7 times 15 points equals 105 points, which is greater than 100 points for the non-extra credit points, right? Because not everybody wants to do extra credit. That's fine. Not going to judge. But I'm saying you can still get the full 100 points if you start as late as week 9. Now, of course, PackBack was open during week 3, right? Technically during week 2, but I didn't expect anybody to join that early. So open during week 3, which meant that every student has 4 to 6 weeks out of the semester where they don't need to participate. Okay? Now, where this gets to you guys. I've been getting inquiries of various things. You know, I've been sick, I have various personal traumas, whatever. Can't do PackBack this week. Can I get some credit pushed forward? Can I do, you know, this week's and a future week? Sadly, no. Okay? Sadly, no. There is no flexibility on weekly PackBack deadlines. Why? Because I am managing about 450 students, and PackBack really isn't set up for individual analysis, right? For me to go in there and dig through posts and find your posts and say, oh, is this correct? And then go back to Blackboard, you know, count it up with all your other points for that week and say, okay, I want to make sure I don't overdo it. I got to do that all by hand. Not going to do it. Got 450 students. This is why there's flexibility built into the system, okay? There's 4 to 6 weeks out of the semester. You don't have to participate if, you know, whatever, something's going on with you that week. But if you wait till the last minute and some crisis comes up, I'm going to say, sorry, you burned your 4 to 6 weeks at the start of the semester. There's nothing left, okay? Again, if it were a smaller pool of students and if PackBack were a little bit easier to deal with, or, you know, if I were setting up mandatory weekly assignments, I might let people opt out of a couple of them. But the way it's built here, you know, there's what, 13 weeks of total optional participation. You don't have to participate every week, but if you wait till the last minute, your system becomes more brittle, okay? So that's why it is the way it is. So please do not wait until the last minute unless you're pretty sure that you'll be able to do it all, or failing that, you're like okay with not coming out with the full points of it, okay? Because the answer for this sort of custom stuff, can you take my points in 1 week and push them to another week, just not gonna happen, okay? Questions on that? No questions? Okay.
So how many, like, a week each scores out of 20?
No, out of 15. PackBack will permit you to do 20. Will do that. I manually cap the scores at 15 each week. Yeah, the logic for that is I would like to create a fairly consistent flow of participation, right? If I let people burn through all the credits in 6 weeks, right? Yeah, we don't really want that. We want to stretch it out a little bit. Okay, so yeah, if you look on PackBack, PackBack is allowed. See, the way PackBack is set up, they say any student can do up to 2 questions and up to 4 answers every week. Why do they hard code that in? I don't know. That's what they do. But that's like the maximum capacity. That's the default setting. But me, I say, okay, fine. You can do any mix of whatever questions and answers as long as you get to 15 points, right? Because 15 points is the weekly cap. Okay, good. Like I said, I really don't want people to have any nasty surprises in week 14 and 15 and think, oh yeah, you know, I waited till the last minute and everything's cool, and then, you know, I don't know, your foot gets hit by a bus or something and you're like, oh, I can't walk, so I can't do pack, you know, and I'll be like, well, sorry about your foot, but the system is what it is. Okay, good. Alrighty, so let's get on with it. We got lecture then. Amazon's recommender system. We'll see how it goes. We're not going to try to knock. I don't have that many slides to get to today, so we'll see. We might end up a little early, which, as I told my morning class, I said the last 5 minutes of lecture are always the longest. So we'll see. Maybe people get out a little early and are happy or something. Okay, so what we'll cover over the course of this lecture, introduction to recommender systems and strategy. That'll be our stuff for today. These other topics we'll push off till Thursday. We should get through it all Thursday. We'll see. Okay, so what recommender systems are? They are systems that deliver sets of links or content based on some set of preferences. And these can be stated preferences. For example, the user says, I want to see this sort of thing. Or they can be revealed preferences indicated by behavior, you know, like Facebook tracks to construct your feed. Or they could even be some assumption by affiliation. For example, if you know, you for weather, obviously the weather is going to assume that you mean your present zip code unless you tell it different, right? So, and there's other assumptions by affiliation as well. So that's what recommender systems are. And they've become so pervasive over the last 20, 25 years that we kind of take them for granted. We expect to see them everywhere. We don't really mostly think about them very much. So some examples. Star or scale ratings. For example, you go to Yelp, you know, you search for some particular restaurant criteria, like show me an Italian restaurant with availability for Saturday at 7 for 2 people, right? And boom, it'll show you, maybe show you a list by, you know, by rankings. You go to Amazon.com, again, you can look for products of various categories and they'll be ranked by stars or scales. Rotten Tomatoes has a % liked feature, right? So different categories of viewers can say what they thought about a particular movie or TV show. And of course, there are many systems that do ordering and filtering without any visible ratings. For example, Google search results. You type in a search query, Google provides you with a list of links that it hopes match what you're looking for, right? Facebook feed, constructed without any visible rankings. But we know hopefully the most interesting stuff is at the top and the least interesting is down at the bottom. Right? And of course, Amazon's recommender system, people who bought this also bought that. There aren't really numbers associated with it as far as Amazon thinks, well, this is a 98% match and this is a 96% match. You know, it just shows a list of things that it hopes are more interesting. I guess I should obviously mention online dating too, right? If you go to one of those things, of course, you know, there's going to be a list of other humans and they're going to be ranked in some sense by % match based on your profile. So there's that too. All right. Now, why do businesses use recommender systems? Well, the short version is because they work. Okay, they don't have to be perfect. They just have to be better than letting unguided humans try to figure out this stuff on their own, right? Or failing that, if, you know, we're at the point now where a lot of businesses have recommender systems. And the businesses have to be, you know, at least about as good as the other businesses. So again, recommendations don't have to be perfect. They just have to be better than the next alternative. And one thing's for sure, recommender systems massively reduce the cognitive effort required, right? The brain effort required to figure out what's going on in these complex systems. So for informational sites, right, think Google, better recommendations lead to more traffic. That's, you know, Google's model. Build a free search engine, people come to use it. Once people are convinced that it's really good and they keep using it a lot, start showing ads along with the search results and make bags and money. That's what Google has successfully done. Amazon, of course, driving sales internally, right? They have those features. People who bought this also bought that, those little blurbs at the bottoms of web pages, product pages. And yeah, they work. You know, they lead people to buy new things and add stuff onto purchases and make more money for Amazon. And hopefully the recommendations themselves are actually good, which leads people to trust them more and use those recommendations. Now, of course, you know, limitations and solutions. So one thing, if you see a list of recommendations that in some sense is, you know, ordered by some kind of ranking or star system, ideally the average on that would be meaningful and would approximate the median and the mode of opinion, right? So, all right, so we all know what the average is, but what are the median and the mode? What are median and mode? What are they? Who's taking stats? Yeah, go for it. Yeah, mode is the most common. Good. What's the median? Go ahead. Yeah, I know. In what sense? Yeah, see, this is why I make that distinction, right? Because average is also, in a way, in the middle. But the median means half the values are above, half the values are below. Now, if you have a standard normal distribution, which if you've taken stats, you know what that is. And if you don't, I'll just say, if you have a bell curve, and hopefully you all know what that is, those three are all going to be pretty much at the same point, right? The fat part of the bell curve is going to be the mode, and it's going to be about in the middle, and it's going to be about equally distributed on both sides, so it'll match with the mode. So ideally, the average links up with that. But in many cases, in fact, they don't. And way back when, many years ago, when I still did research, I actually even wrote a paper on this. I'm gonna link to it because not often I get to link to my own research. Yeah. So way back when, screen, I know, screen. All right. So this one, way back when, I did a little conference paper back in 08, and it's kind of cool. I just noticed I have a patent citation for that, so that's fun. Anyway, what this was, again, product reviews, wherever they are, if they're going to show like some kind of star ranking, to be meaningful, it should show the distribution, and the distribution should be kind of like a bell curve. But what you often see in real life is that the people who leave product reviews do it because they're either super happy or super pissed. And so you see a lot of 5-star rankings, a lot of 1-star rankings. Now, one that what I say in this paper is based, and I'm not saying this, you know, this turned the world around, but this was a serious problem in 2008. And over the next few years, you know, businesses who were surely already aware of the problem started looking at their own systems and found different ways to make their recommendations more meaningful. Okay, and so back when there was a book by Hillary Clinton. So you know who Hillary Clinton is, but you may not know that she won a Grammy. Anybody know she won a Grammy? For a book. It was for a spoken word book called It Takes a Village, right? Quite a few years ago. Now, when they first started selling that book through Amazon, you know, just like we see now where people will come in and review bomb some new movies because they don't like whatever tilt it has, people came in and review bombed Hillary's book. So there were a lot of 5-star ratings. There were also a lot of 1-star ratings. But the problem was those ratings mostly weren't about the book itself. The 1-star ratings were mostly from people who just hated Hillary because she was Hillary. The 5-star ratings were mostly from people who loved Hillary because she was Hillary, right? Wasn't really about the product. So, you know, they needed to fix that. I'm going to say, here's another example, and I'm going to use myself. So we go to Doug Lundquist, rate my professor. All right. And so here's the thing. What? Yeah. So my rating here is 3.5, which fine, whatever. You know what? I get paid the same either way, and I got promoted this last cycle, and I'm not really chasing the final promotion, so whatever, I'm good. Anyway, 3.5. But if you look at my reviews, there aren't a lot of 3s and 4s, right? There's a good chunk of 5s, which is nice, and there's a substantial chunk of 1s, which is less nice. But I'm saying, you look at this is not a bell curve. This is like a W curve, right? Or if you flip it around, it's kind of like giving me the finger. I don't know. But, right? So this is not terribly meaningful. The 3.5 number is not terribly meaningful. Okay? And this is a problem you know, they can't do much on Rate My Professor because they have a small sample size. And again, really, this is the key example. You know, students who really like a professor, really like a course, they might show up and give a 5. People who like wanted an A and got a B+, they're like, I'm gonna get you, and they give a 1. Or like, you know, people who smoked too much weed and dropped out, you know, they give you a 1, whatever, right? Because we all know that's RMP it is what it is. All right. Other things, niche products, right? Ones with a very small target market. You can find, and see, I'm from the Midwest, so I would normally say niche, but I've decided to be correct and say niche, even though it sounds awful to me. Yeah, RottenTomatoes.com, they have split ratings, don't they, for critics and ordinary viewers? So for example, the one that came up this morning, somebody mentioned Morbius. I was gonna try to find one of the ones that, you know, got review bombed, but if we go to Rotten Tomatoes, Morbius, screen, yeah, thank you. And you can look at the reviews, right? And the reviews, 15% among the critics are saying this is a steaming pile of crap, but the audience, 71%, they're like, hey, it's not bad, we had fun, right? So there was a bat and stuff blew up and whatever, I got my money's worth. So what does that mean? Well, a big part of how that arises is selection bias. So think about the people who are writing these reviews, right? Do you think the average movie critic is going to want to see, you know, some sort of, you know, B-movie superhero kind of thing? Yeah, probably not, right? Your professional movie critics, you know, they tend to like the fancier, upscale, Oscar-type movies. It is what it is, right? Whereas the people who watch the trailers for Morbius, or people who are like big fans, I guess there was a comic book, people who are big fans of the comic book, they might say, oh yeah, I'm so excited to see this, and they watch it and there's like, hey, not bad, you know, it delivered what it promised. And so there's some self-selection bias in that people who actually go to buy a product tend to be the ones who, you know, thought it would be a good match for them in the first place, right? Actual product buyers tend to have higher reviews than people who have not bought the product, or, you know, it's not their sort of thing. So there's that. Finally, homogenized self-reinforcing results. This is the last thing. So has anybody ever used Google Scholar? Yeah? What's Google Scholar? What do we find on Google Scholar? Scholarly articles. Yeah, a lot of research papers, right? Yeah, I'll accept that, scholarly articles. So on Google, so way back when I was doing my PhD and doing research and looking up papers and stuff like that, I was doing something in the topic of mobile ad hoc networks. And mobile ad hoc networks, so back around 2006, my advisor had this idea, because, you know, these devices were pretty new. The iPhone was pretty new, and nobody ever had enough bandwidth. And so the idea was you could develop applications that would work by having a lot of devices on the ground to communicate with each other instead of having the signals go to towers and get processed somewhere else, right? So we thought, yeah, you know, this is probably a thing that's going to be big, and it still has some uses, like for vehicular safety, what's called inter-vehicular communication, but it's not the big thing. It didn't, you know, really take over. Anyway, so that's what mobile ad hoc networks are, and I used to look up papers of those. Now, if you're new to the research field, right? If you don't like have a big name, one of the things you got to do, well, you write papers anyway, but you do something called a literature review. And in the literature review, you try to position where your topic is. You try to say, here's all the stuff that has been done that has led to this. Here are some questions that have been more or less resolved, but here's what I'm working on that hasn't been entirely resolved, and that's why I'm working on it. So, you know, you kind of build a case for why should anybody pay attention to this paper. Now, if you're fairly new to the field, one of the things that you do is try to cite papers that seem really relevant, like they have a good citation count, right? If a lot of other people have cited the paper, then you can kind of believe that, yeah, this is probably a relevant, important paper. And again, if you're new to the field, you don't really have that sense of discrimination or background to know, oh, this was a really good paper, even though it didn't have maybe as many citations. So what you do is you do so there was this one routing protocol, dynamic source routing, for example, And you can look up papers like that, like the big one by Johnson and Maltz here, 3,000 citations. So what happens with that, you're some novice researcher, you say, oh, I'm talking about routing protocols in mobile ad hoc networks. I'll do a quick search and find some, and this thing pops up, and it's got 3,000 citations. Well, hey, nobody's going to argue with you. If you have a paper with 3,000 citations, nobody's going to say that's not an important paper, right? Maybe you could have found a better one, but nobody's going to say this is garbage. So you cite it. But guess what? Everybody else who's doing research does the same thing. They all cite it. Then the next person who, the next batch of people coming around, they see, oh, it's got 4,000 citations. Well, wow, this must be super important. So they all keep citing it, self-reinforcing. Things become popular because they're popular. So this is another issue that recommender systems have to deal with. Google has gotten a lot better about mixing in the numbers. It used to be back when, you'd look at this stuff and it would just be like all the top highly cited papers at the top. But eventually, Google's mixed in some here that, 199, 129. So certainly useful papers. Here's one cited by 45, but not like overwhelmingly piled up with high citation count, because they recognize this is a problem too. All right, so usage and limitations of recommender systems has been covered. Okay, now Amazon's recommender system in particular. So remember, Amazon's recommender system is people who bought this also bought that, people who looked at this item also looked at these other items, okay? It is a significant defense against new retail competitors. So what do we mean? Well, anybody who wants to do the same stuff Amazon does needs to replicate that system basically. So let's talk. What resources and data would you need? So specifically, what data would you need to replicate Amazon's recommender system? Again, we're talking about people who bought this also bought that. What data would you need? You would need a list of people who bought this and a list of people who bought that, wouldn't you? Yeah, purchase data, right? But let's not overcomplicate it. You need to know who bought what over a fairly long window of time, right? I mean, I don't think Amazon is going back close to 30 years with all the data they have. I mean, maybe they are, probably not. They probably focus on, just the last maybe few years, because older data tends to be kind of irrelevant. Although, I don't know, they might use the really old data in some cases. So that's part of it, right? They need a lot of purchase data. What else? What other stuff would they need? What's included in a system? If we talk about an information technology system, what are the 5 things? So data's in the middle, right? On the right side is the machinery, and on the left side are the human factors, right? So on one side, machinery, you need a lot of hardware, you need a lot of software to run the algorithms, deliver the data fast, right? You need all that. So you need a big, expensive system to do it at Amazon scale, because there's a lot of data. As far as the humans, you'd need somebody to set up that system, give it good algorithms, test it, figure out how to update it, all that kind of stuff, right? So you need not only just a big pile of data, you need to set up the system to do it, and you have to have humans in place to do things that humans need to do to manage the system. So that's a big deal. And so we can fairly ask, how long would it take to design, develop, and implement this kind of system? Well, months, certainly, maybe years, right? It would take a long time. And that's assuming, again, you can easily get all this, because it's not entirely clear that you can. It's not entirely clear that a company could get big enough to compete with Amazon without having a good recommender system in place, right? But suppose they could get that batch of data, then yeah, even then they'd be talking about taking a while to develop this thing. So we might also ask, what might be an equivalent substitute? What might be a way that a company could get the same people who bought this also bought that results without actually having their own system? How might they do that? I'll give you a hint. It's pretty much a weaselly way to do it. Yeah, copy Amazon's, right? Basically, somebody wants to buy a product on your page, you go to Amazon, lift people who bought this also bought that resources, right? I should also mention what resources. In order to get that much data as Amazon has, you also have to have a product line that's comparable to Amazon's, right? Amazon carries literally hundreds of millions, possibly billions of products, right? If you're some small business that carries, just a few hundred or a few thousand things, you're never going to get, as good of results as Amazon gets. But yeah, equivalent substitute, you could run those same kind of queries through Amazon's system. Since it's free, Amazon might put up with it for a while. Now, interestingly, this is exactly something that Bing did to Google about 10 years ago. Anybody heard about this? Anybody heard about Bing stealing Google search results? It's okay if you haven't, but you maybe have. I mean, yeah, you can Google this. So Bing stealing Google results, and there's a blurb for it. So what happened? So Bing, Bing is kind of like Google's sad loser cousin. Oh yeah, screen, thank you. But we'll talk about that in a moment too. So what Google actually did, they created 100 bogus queries, right? You can see like hi, why, bye, perk, rag, whatever that is, and inserted a fake result for each one, so that when Bing couldn't find the answers on its own servers, they ran the query through Google and pulled that and delivered the results, right? So within weeks, same results began to appear on Microsoft's search engine. Microsoft denies copying Google, accused Google of conducting spy novelesque stunts. I mean, of course Bing copied it, right? Whether it was like a directive that came down from Bill Gates or some particular Bing engineer who wanted to keep, make Bing look better than it was, that's an open question. But did Bing steal the results from Google? Yeah, it seems pretty clear that they did. Having said that, you can't steal what's free, right? All they did is they used what Google had already made available, right? Google's free to use, so they can't complain too much. The other thing I'm going to point out, Google actually really does want Bing to exist as a sad loser competitor. Reason is, if Google's the only search engine in the Western world, pretty soon somebody's going to say, hey, Google's a monopoly. We need to break up that monopoly so consumers have choice. Well, then what happens? Then Google's very unhappy, right? So by having Bing exist as a sad, non-threatening competitor, Bing is at most 10% of Google's market share, 10% of its revenue, probably somewhat less than that, probably closer to 5%. Bing is not a serious threat to Google. Bing's not going to push Google out of the search engine, primacy that it's in. However, the fact that Bing exists means Google can credibly say, yeah, we're not a monopoly. Look, there's Bing over there. If people don't like Google, they can go use Bing. So anyway, so this is an example, another example of scale advantages. So like we talked in the first week, online businesses, if they can manage the problems associated with scale, they tend to get massive, massive benefits from being really big. In the case of Amazon, right, their scale, more historical data, more products bought by more users over a longer time window, means they can give better recommendations about things that are interesting to customers. In particular, reduces sampling errors, right? So the fact that Amazon has this massive pile of data that's probably like 100 times bigger than anything anyone else has means their sample errors are going to be a lot lower, meaning it's a lot less likely that Amazon is going to see some fluky event where it just happened that people who bought one item also bought another item, but that's not really likely to repeat going forward because it was just a fluke, right? Amazon doesn't see nearly as much of that as perhaps a smaller business where only maybe 10 or 20 people bought a particular item, and then the fact that 1 or 2 people bought another item along with it really, bumps it up in the rankings. Anyway, so there's going to be less sample error because Amazon has more data. The other thing, they can do better proprietary trend analysis. So Amazon, annual revenues in the ballpark of $500 billion a year. Suppose Amazon can upgrade their system to deliver 1% better recommendations that lead to 1% better sales. And that system costs $5 billion. Well, Amazon can look at that and say, yeah, that's a no-brainer. We'll make back our money within 2 or 3 years, and after that, it's all profit, right? This is a great thing, let's do it. Whereas if you're a much smaller business, suppose, for example, you're a business that's making $5 billion a year total in revenues, and this new system would cost you $5 billion. You're going to look at that and say, oh, you know what, that's really going to take us a long time to make that money back, just because it improves our results by 1%. Probably not worth it, let's skip it. So Amazon can come up with better models because they're so much bigger. Even really expensive improvements for a fairly small percentage increase, that small percentage increase is really big in just absolute dollars. Anyway, all this is by design, not accident, right? The very back when the inner circle of Amazon was building out what the company was going to be, this is one of the things they were looking at is, if we get, here's what we can do. Here's stuff we can do that ordinary paper catalogs can't. We can do these online recommendations. So before we get deep into that, though, we're going to take some time and talk about strategy. And first, we'll distinguish between casual and business usage. So casual usage of strategy just means what I'm going to do and being aware that other people are going to respond to that. For example, suppose you're playing chess, right? You might have a strategy of attacking or defending. You might have a long plan that you're going to try to queen a pawn somewhere, or you might have, whatever. You have some other strategic goals. And you know that your opponent is going to respond. But based upon what you know about chess, how good you are, what your skill set is, what you think your opponent can block or not block, that's going to determine what you feel the best strategy is for you. For business, it's similar, but there's some more detail to it. So for business, it's a plan for major long-term organizational action. So number one, it involves the entire organization. Number two, it's big, it's major, and it's long-term, right? It's not like something that you're looking at the next week. You're looking at like a few years in advance. So strategy aspects, time, typically when you talk about organizational strategy, you're looking at strategies at least a year, probably more likely in like 3 to 5 years. And you'll say something like, where do we want our business to be 5 years from now? Well, the strategy is the plan to get there. Scope, the scope is the entire business. Now you can distinguish between organizational and functional, the last bullet point there. Organizational means the whole organizational. Functional means subunits of the organization. Think departments, right? Like marketing, like operations, like IT, right? They all have their different roles to play. And assets. When you're talking about organizational strategy, it is a big effort involving, substantial allocation of assets. It's not saying, we're Ford Motor Company and our strategy will be to run phone book ads, right? That might be part of your strategy for some reason, but, phone book ads are not that expensive. It's not going to be a tremendous asset allocation issue. So yeah, that really wouldn't be part of, that wouldn't be a whole strategy. Okay, so that's what we mean when we talk about strategy. Big, long-term, involves the whole organization. Okay, now, one way to think about this is Porter's 5 forces model. Now, Porter was a marketing guy, and we'll talk about what strangeness that leads to on Thursday. But he had this question, right? Why are some businesses able to earn higher than average profits over long stretches of time? Which, if you think about it, shouldn't make sense. Okay, so I'm going to draw a picture because everybody likes pictures. All right. So this is an intersection, and I'm going to draw some cars, and they're going to be really crappy looking cars, but they're still going to be cars. Okay, so here's a car. Ta-da. And give it a windshield. And see, that's a car. I know. Okay, so there's a car, and we have a lot of cars. Thank you. I know where you could buy one. All right. Now, this intersection is very, very busy, but there's nothing at the intersection. So what do you think it needs? What? Stoplight. No, it needs a McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. They're eating it. Okay, so that's a fucked up McDonald's, but it's still a McDonald's. Okay, now, because there's nothing else at this intersection, how's this McDonald's doing? It's doing great. It's making bags and bags of money, isn't it? I'm going to represent that by a long string of dollar signs. Yeah. All right. But what happens? What happens when the good people at Burger King see how much money this McDonald's is making? What are they going to, what? They want in on that, don't they? They want some of that sweet, sweet burger money. That's right. So, right? Because they just woke up the king. All right, and we're just going to go BK on top. Now, as it happens, this intersection is still so busy that even though both of these organizations are making a lot less money than they used to, they're still making a lot of money. Life is still pretty good. So what happens? What happens next? Wendy's, correct. Wendy's. We're keeping with our burger theme. So Wendy's opens up here, right? And maybe at this point, Wendy's, as you know, cuts enough profit off of these other guys that perhaps at that point they're all making about the industry average profit. At which point, you know, the other burger guys, other fast food places waiting in the wings, they're like going to be like, you know what, we'd like to put something there, but it's pretty crowded. We're not going to make that much money. Just forget it. We'll go somewhere else. Okay. And this is what happens. If there is a really good opportunity for making money, right, businesses are going to swarm onto it and take out all the extra excess profit until everybody who's left is just making average profit. So this is the riddle, right? How can it be that some businesses do better over the long term? So what he did, he gathered a whole bunch of data, and when I say empirical, that means basically he looked at what actually happened in the real world. He did this massive empirical study looking at thousands of firms and dozens of different factors over decades to try to measure the competitive intensity of the market, right? To basically figure how are businesses able to bypass this general rule of life that, you know, competition tends to take away any excess profit. Well, he identified 5 factors that led to sustained superior performance, right? And he called those the 5 forces. So resistance to these things is basically what's going to give businesses the ability to make more money over the long term. So the first one, competitive rivalry, right? If you have 2 businesses that are really, really strong rivals against each other, they're going to try to undercut each other's business, right? They're going to lower prices in order to sabotage each other, steal market share from each other, with the net effect being that prices go down and then, you know, they're both making less money. And this often happens in dying industries. So you look at something like newspapers over the last 20 years. I mean, I can remember when most people got a newspaper, and I can look around now when like hardly anybody does. Yeah, but there's a window. There were a lot of major cities in the US that for a long time had 2 major papers, 2 or more, but then, you know, all but one of them went away because the market wasn't big enough to support them all. So in the meantime, you know, they're all trying to undercut each other, offer the newspaper for less so that they can, you know, get enough revenue to stay afloat, right? In Chicago, the last round of that was the Tribune and the Sun-Times were competing for a while. Now the Sun-Times. So if there's a lot of competitive rivalry, that's going to very quickly remove any potential for excess profit. Next to bargaining power. So let's think about McDonald's here. Suppose you like McDonald's, right? You like McDonald's and you feel like getting McDonald's for lunch, but you find out that McDonald's has decided to start charging $9.99 for a Big Mac. And you say, well, I like Big Macs, but I don't $9.99 like Big Macs. So what are you going to do? Is anybody here going to pay $9.99 for a Big Mac? I mean, if maybe you are. No, nobody? What about $4.99? Would you pay $4.99 for a Big Mac? $3.99. $1? I'm just asking. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, well, what I'm saying, if you decide not to pay what McDonald's asking for a Big Mac, what do? You go to Wendy's, even though they have deviant square burgers. Okay. I mean, there's people who like Wendy's deviant square burgers. I don't know. That's fine. Not going to judge. The point is, customers have options, right? Customers have a lot of options for fast food, for burgers in particular. Customers have a lot of options for other food generally, okay? So bargaining power of customers means if people don't like McDonald's, if people don't want to pay what McDonald's people don't want to pay what McDonald's is charging, they can walk and still be fairly happy, right? That means they have a lot of bargaining power. But what about suppliers? Right? Suppose you're some rancher in Wyoming, and you're not a big rancher. You got just 10,000 cattle, and McDonald's is paying like $1 a pound for beef. And you say, well, $1 a pound's not enough. It's costing more because blah, 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 blah. And McDonald's, we're not going to sell it to you for less than $1.25 a pound. Bearing in mind that McDonald's sells billions of burgers every year. What do you think? What do you think McDonald's response is going to be to that? Yeah, McDonald's is going to say, good luck charging $1.25. We can find a lot of people still willing to sell to us for $1, maybe $1.05. We don't have to jump all the way to $1.25, right? Yeah, so individual suppliers, because McDonald's is so much bigger, individual suppliers don't have much bargaining power, right? It's not like if there were one big ranch that sold all the cows on earth, then, if they wanted to charge higher, McDonald's would either have to pay it or change their recipe. Right? That single massive cow producer would have a lot of bargaining power. But as it is, yeah, not so much. The other two, threat of substitutes, threat of new entrants. So substitutes means products that fulfill the same need, but are not the same product. Right? So McDonald's in the late 90s, I don't know if you're aware, McDonald's had sort of an existential threat. Anybody want to guess? A kind of food that's similar and fast, but much, much healthier than typical fast food. Subway. Subway was the big one. Subway was a very serious threat to McDonald's in the late 90s. And McDonald's did, in fact, update their menu to include a lot of, I would say, healthier, but I'm going to say less unhealthy options. That was the thing. Because why? Because McDonald's didn't want to lose all those people to Subway. Because again, if you've watched Super Size Me, or even if you have any common sense at all, you know that eating McDonald's every day can't be good for you, right? I mean, once a month, once a week, sure, fine, but like every day, that stuff will catch up. So McDonald's had to be aware of the threat of substitutes because, yeah, at the end of the day, McDonald's is food, and if people are offering tasty, healthy, cheap food, they're probably going to beat McDonald's in that regard. Last one, threat of new entrants. So threat of new entrants, different chains coming into the competitive environment, basically to compete against McDonald's, doing the stuff that McDonald's does. Now, there's a whole spectrum of burgers, right? I mean, with, I don't know, maybe White Castle at the bottom and Hardee's not much above that, McDonald's a little bit above, then Burger King, then maybe Five Guys. I don't know, I don't need to draw a whole burger chart, but McDonald's is pretty well ensconced at that, at its particular location of cheapness versus, I guess, quality, right? It is, McDonald's isn't the best food, but, they make a decent $1.39 burger. So I don't see anybody coming in to, knock McDonald's out of that spot. What there might be changing tastes. People might try to eat healthier, or people might have more money and they might try to graduate to a better grade of burger. But as far as somebody coming along and knocking McDonald's out of its spot as the cheap, a good cheap burger purveyor, I don't see that happening, right? So anyway, any of these businesses, you look at those 5 factors, and to the extent that they're resistant to them, right? So McDonald's experiences a lot of competitive rivalry. Customers have a lot of bargaining power. There is a substantial threat of substitutes, but it's got good bargaining power against suppliers, and there's not much threat of new entrants. McDonald's has a chance of earning sustained average, above average, but yeah, probably not. Probably it's gonna be about average in its spot, right? You tend to need, a pretty consistent, good situation on those to make it work. All right, yeah. As what? It's a bigger view of threat of competition, right? I mean, see, threat of competition would probably go into threat of new entrants, competitive rivalry, threat of substitutes, right? Those things. But bargaining power of customers, maybe, because they can go somewhere else. But bargaining power of suppliers, that's not really about competition, right? Oh, like in economic terms? Yeah, I mean, we could talk, there is no such thing as perfect competition, right? Perfect competition is a theoretical construct. It's something they talk about in economics as they say, imagine the world were like this. If there is perfect competition, then there can be no sustained competitive advantage, right? There just can't be, because, right? One of the things like in the perfect competition model, basically it means that if I recall, because it's been like 20 years since I took microecon, one of the things is that any action by an individual person isn't going to change the price at all, right? So if one seller decides they are going to not be willing to pay more, or they're going to demand more money, that's not going to throw off the curve. It's still going to be, you know, the overall price distribution, what people are going to pay is still going to be the same. And, you know, in reality, what happens if one person steps out a little bit, you've lost that person to a substitute probably, right? Or you've lost that person, and it does have a small effect. It doesn't have a big effect. You know, like maybe if you're going out to 3 decimal places, you're not going to notice the effect, but there is an effect. Anyway, but yeah, you know, if we're talking econ, then yeah, they talk about perfect competition there, but you know, that's, again, that's kind of like a starting point for a conversation about how the world is. But the way the world is that there is unevenness. Because why? Because people got to look around for things in different places. For example, if you are in downtown Chicago and you're hungry for McDonald's, but McDonald's is charging a $9.99 burger, you got a lot of other options, right? But imagine if you're out way the hell in the middle of nowhere, like you're in middle of Nebraska, and there's not another Oasis for an hour, and the only store that's open at that place is McDonald's, or you can pick up some sushi from the gas station. You know, even if that burger's $9.99, there's a pretty good chance you're going to buy it, right? Because it's what's there. So again, perfect competition. Yeah. Okay, cool, but good cross-reference. Okay. Now, sustainable advantage, remember, means sustainable higher than average profitability. So some examples: licensed taxi, right? Up before Uber and Lyft, municipalities issued so many licenses or medallions to taxis in their city, and that kept the price, you know, the profits that taxi companies could make kept it artificially high. There was sort of a deliberate shortage. If you have a sweet hotel location, right, like you're at the beach in Hawaii or at Fiji, you're always going to be able to charge a lot more than even hotels just a block away. Why? Because people are willing to pay a lot to be able to walk right out from their room onto the beach. Any control of a limited resource, right? The classic example there is the De Beers Corporation in South Africa with diamonds, right? They keep the price artificially high by only trickling out a small share of them at any given time. Other things, long-term exclusive contracts. Imagine if you're, you know, producing something for the U.S. military, you know you're going to make good money doing that, and the longer the contract, the better. Or if you're really good at continuous innovation, you know, companies like Apple or Intel used to be like the prime example for that. They generate, you know, new generations of chips every couple years. Yeah, so there's different ways, but the key takeaway from that is if you have some rare and valuable skill or ability or resource that is not easily replicated, and again, it's valuable, that's going to be your gateway to higher than average profitability. And you can even think about this in a domestic sense. So for example, in my household, I have the rare and valuable skill of being able to cook, which means when it comes time to negotiate chores, you know, my wife will be like, oh, we got a lot of stuff we can do. You know, we got a lot of stuff to do. I say, okay, well, look, you can either do all the dishes and vacuum or cook. And she'll be like, fuck, fine, I'll do the dishes and vacuum, you know, because what's she going to do, cook? Yeah, so that's, you know, and I can do either. I can vacuum, I can wash dishes, you know, but again, I'm not doing all three. So when we're breaking down that stuff, you know, I toss out that. So anyway, other things, just because something is sustainable does not mean it's permanent, right? So GM, General Motors, they had their golden time for about 30 years after World War II, because after 1945, the U.S. was basically the only, civilian goods economy of any substance in the world, right? Germany and Japan were smoking wrecks. What else? Russia, first of all, they weren't big on consumer goods anyway. But on top of that, they'd been like running their machinery into the ground just to make more tanks and weapons and stuff. The UK was in a similar thing. Their equipment was old and they'd been running it over time. It really needed repair. France had been occupied by the Germans for 4 years and so 5 years. And so everything worth stealing was long gone. So, the US had this kind of golden time where they were the only big manufacturer in the world. So they were cranking out cars like, they were cranking out lots and lots and lots of cars. Well, management and the unions would go to management and say, hey, we should be paid more. You can afford to pay us more. And the management would look at stuff and they say, you know what? We can afford to pay you more. We'll pay you more. That's great. And so things kept on going for a while until the Japanese showed up around 1970 and started producing better quality cars for much cheaper than the U.S. companies were doing. And that, was part of the long, slow decline for the U.S. car makers. Anyway, so yeah. When we say sustainable, we just mean over a long time. Nothing is permanent. You never know. Okay. Now, strategy development. So first I'm going to do this 2x2 matrix. So the way you start by developing a strategy is first distinguish what's possible from what's not possible. So I'm going to ask you, are you going to do what's possible or what's not possible? Yeah, it kind of makes sense, right? Kind of obvious. If you can't do something, that's the first thing you want to filter out. Now, for businesses, you don't usually mean literally that it's not possible. You mean essentially it's not part of the business's skill set, right? So, for example, Ford Motor Company, they could decide they want to build hotels and amusement parks, right? They certainly have the financial resources to do it, and they could probably, make decent, amusement park equipment, but it's not really their core business, right? So they're going to look at that and say, yeah, probably that's not really something we're looking at. On the other hand, once you've figured out what's possible, then you can look at the probable outcomes. And are you going to pick something that has a probable good outcome or a probable bad outcome? Probable good outcome, right? The dollar signs are a giveaway, right? That's what businesses are basically doing. They're saying, out of all the things that we could do, let's look at the things that, we can actually do with some degree of expertise. And then among those things, look at the bad outcomes and good outcomes, right? And we're going to pick the thing that we think is going to have the best outcome. That's basically what strategy is. So where strategy development starts is considering the internal and external environment. So internally, your business is going to look at its own capabilities, right? The things it's able to do. Externally, it's going to look at things like the market for the product, what the competitors are doing, macroeconomic factors that tend to increase or decrease demand generally. And the standard tool for this is something called the SWOT analysis. Now, SWOT analysis is a pretty ridiculous name, but I assure you that businesses actually do this. My wife is a project manager for Accenture, and every now and then I hear her say, oh, we'll grab some low-level employee, make them do a SWOT analysis, right? This is actually something they do. And the four letters SWOT, the first two stand for internal factors, strengths and weaknesses. Strengths, things that the organization is good at. Weaknesses, things that the organization is not so good at. And external factors, opportunities, things where the business could potentially make a bunch of money, or threats, things that could result in the business making less money. Okay, so the ideal case is that your SWOT analysis identifies some large-scale opportunity that can be exploited by your existing strengths. And the classic example of this is Apple releasing the iPhone around 2006, right? Smartphones existed, people, well, not really smartphones as such, but personal digital assistants and BlackBerries existed. People really liked them, but people were ready for smartphones. Right? There were a lot of phones that were internet capable there, but not were as fun and easy to use as the iPhone. So it was a tremendous large-scale opportunity. Basically they could sell as many of those as they were able to make the first few years. and they could exploit it with Apple's existing strengths. Apple had just, made the iPod, which was great. It was, visually somewhat similar to the iPhone, used some of the same technology. They had engineers who were good at making this kind of device. So yeah, and and it went from Apple being, kind of a people in the 90s would look at Apple and say, wow, how are they even still around? To, alternating between, one of the top few businesses in the world by market cap. So strategy development. Okay. Now again, internally, business has to be aware of its own strengths and weaknesses, right? So one of the things they'll look at is past performance. How well has the business done on similar kinds of projects, right? So anytime the business says, this is our strategy, they try to figure out, based on their own past performance, how well is this going to go? If they don't have much past performance to go on, if this is something pretty new, they might do a pilot effort, right? Some small scale operation. So for example, suppose Ford Motor Company, they decide to branch out from cars and SUVs and start making a lot of cargo trucks, right? Really, really big trucks. Well, they could do a pilot effort, right? They could design some prototypes. They could look at how much that's going to cost, see what the quality of the thing is, let potential customers see what they think about them, figure out how much it's going to cost to produce them at scale. Look at all that stuff. The last thing businesses do is looking at their employees' skill tracking. So over the course of time, employees tend to gain new skills, right? And they'll be better at things that they used to be terrible at. So at the end of a project, one of the things my wife's teams always do is they go in and they say, oh, Joe, before we started this, Joe didn't know much about, designing user interfaces. But guess what? He designed a user interface. We can do that checkbox on his profile. Susie, going into this, she didn't know much about security analysis. But guess what? She was involved in this project that did a lot of security work. Boom, we can hit that checkbox for her. Right? So they look at how employees gather skills over time. And then when the time comes to pursue some effort, they can always say, oh yeah, let's look, we have employees that fit this. Of course, externally, data's a lot harder to get, right? Internally, you have a pretty good idea of what's going on. But externally, you need to know things about your competitors' capabilities, your partners' capabilities, right? So again, if Ford is trying to build these big cargo trucks, they have to look and see, well, what are the comparable cargo trucks that our competitors are making? Are we, we have to either make a truck that's better at a similar cost or one that's much cheaper with comparable quality. We have to have some sort of benefit there that we're offering people. Likewise, partners' capabilities, right? All the businesses that are supplying parts to Ford, supplying components, maybe they don't have the components that are suitable for these big cargo trucks, right? Maybe they'd have to make new ones, or maybe Ford will have to go out and find new partners to keep up, right? That's something they have to look at. Product demand is obviously important, but always, kind of an open question. You don't really know what the future is going to bring. And of course, potential substitutes. The idea that you might be designing this great new product, but advances in the world might make it obsolete before it even hits the market, right? So for example, when Apple was designing the iPhone, you can bet that the BlackBerry people were designing the next generation of BlackBerry that not many people bought. So that happens. All right. Now, doctrine, culture, and branding. Okay, so a lot of this strategy talk grew out of the military because, people think strategy, they think military operations. So doctrine and culture are factors that are going to filter out some strategic choices. So the term for the military is doctrine, and that basically means how your armed forces are going to fight, right? So right now, we have this war going on between Russia and Ukraine, kind of between Russia and almost the rest of the world, but in Ukraine anyway. And clearly, Russia has an offensive posture, right? They are looking, to take little chunks of land off of a lot of their neighbors, and accordingly, they have offensive weapons. They have tanks that can, drive in and cause carnage. They have long-range bombers. They have, special forces like paratroopers. They can drop behind enemy lines. All the sort of stuff you're going to need if you're going to attack somebody. Meanwhile, countries that have a defensive posture, right, they're not going to have tanks so much as they're going to have anti-tank guns and, anti-tank rockets and stuff. They're not going to have bombers so much as they're going to have anti-aircraft systems. They are going to have some fighters, fly defense patrols. They're going to have a different set of weapons. They're going to have a different way of fighting. they're going to spend, you know, more on barbed wire and minefields than they're going to spend on, I don't know, long-range artillery. I don't know. So that's going to filter strategic choices, right? If you're planning on going on offense, you're going to buy one set of weapons and train your troops one way. If you're planning on being defense, you're going to do different things. This has echoes in corporate culture, right? So corporate culture basically means how your organization is going to do business. For example, you might be some stuffy old English firm that, you know, routinely uses the line, we are going to avoid even a hint of impropriety, right? They're not going to take on any business deal just to make a buck. They want to make sure that everything they do is very legitimate, very above board, because their centuries old business reputation means a lot to them. On the other hand, you have businesses like Enron, and if you haven't heard of them, you surely will, but Enron's governing ethos was make a buck by any way you can. If you can do it by some sort of legal mechanism, great, even if those legal things are borderline illegal, but you know, they did a lot of fraudulent activities too, and that's just what their corporate culture was, right? Basically anything for a buck. Now, options that are opposed to that doctrine or culture most likely aren't even going to be considered. So you look at Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway, his company. Warren Buffett famously only invests in businesses that he understands, tends to be pretty simple businesses that produce a physical product. So he doesn't invest much in tech. He's been vocally against crypto and saying, you know, it's basically a lot of smoke and mirrors and not much real value there. And so his operations don't invest in it at all, right? Because that's his doctrine, is he's going to invest in a certain kind of business. You can also have businesses that, you can also have products that might be incompatible with a brand, because the brand of a business, people get comfortable with that. It's really hard for a business to move outside its brand, right? So if you try to, well, let's give an example. So Walmart, right? Walmart could make a very nice wedding dress, I'm sure, and sell it affordably. But what's the problem with that? What's the problem with buying a Walmart wedding dress? Well, I mean, let's assume the wedding dress, you know, they make a very nice $99 wedding dress. What's the problem with that? No bride wants to limit her budget to $99 for her wedding dress, right? I mean, that's really the thing. And when there's the name too, right? Walmart has a reputation of just, you know, cheap, not as far as, you know, affordable, but cheap as in kind of low quality. But the whole point of a wedding is to spend a bunch of money and have a big party and show how prosperous you are, all that sort of stuff, right? And if a bride has to say, yup, bought my dress at Walmart, I mean, there might be a few people out there that think that that's great, but buying a Walmart wedding dress is basically the equivalent of making your own wedding dress out of duct tape. So, yeah, not really a great thing. Likewise, McDonald's. I'm sure McDonald's could make a very tasty $1 sushi roll, and it'd probably be, you know, perfectly fine. But sushi in the United States is one of those, you know, pretty upscale foods. The same people who like sushi tend not to eat at McDonald's very much, and vice versa. And the people who would eat sushi, they're going to kind of look at it and say, oh, I don't know, sushi at McDonald's, I don't know. So, like gas station sushi, yeah, it's a step above, but not a big step above. Same thing, right? Yeah. So again, even though these are perfectly viable, maybe even sensible products, the reality is they conflict very fundamentally with brands, and customers are going to look and say, no, I don't think so. So, last thing to talk about, strategic alignment. So a couple slides here, but you understand that a business is composed of a bunch of departments that work together, right? And if you have some big organizational plan, the different functional areas, they have to work together in some way to support that. So I'm going to give an example. Yep, screen. Okay, so suppose you are a bicycle manufacturer and your strategy is to increase sales by 10% per year for the next 5 years. Okay? And further, you will achieve this by selling a more expensive, higher quality generation of bicycles. Okay, so you're not just going to try to sell the same bike more. You're going to try to introduce a new, more advanced bicycle that you can sell each unit for more. Okay, so how will the various functional areas support this strategy? Okay, so let's talk about marketing. That's an easy one. What might marketing do? Remember, new generation of bicycles. Yeah, I mean, they'll do some kind of maybe commercials about the exciting new features, right? They'll say, yeah, these new bikes, you got to try one out, right? What about customer relationship management? What about CRM? Who do you think might be in line to buy one of these bikes? Well, let me ask this way. If somebody bought one of the old bikes last year, do you think they'd probably be ready to buy a new bike? Probably not. What about somebody who bought one of these bikes 5 or 10 years ago? Maybe, right? It'd be a better shot, right? What about people you know are older and they just had kids and those kids have grown up and they're ready for their first 12-speed, right? Maybe sell it to them, right? So yeah, you know, prior buyers or buyers with, you know, new family members. Okay? Yeah, stuff like that. And you could track your databases and find out, yeah, look, these people we need. What about manufacturing, operations? Actually making the bicycles. What might they do to support this strategy? Remember, more expensive. What's that? Yeah, I mean, basically, new product designs, right? You have your engineers make a new product design. What else? What else might you need? What? Yeah, well, money, but that's really a finance thing, not a manufacturing thing. Well, the assumption is not necessarily that you're going to produce more, because each unit is going to be more expensive, but there's something involved with production. What's that? Maybe. What I was thinking is higher quality machinery, right? Because you all know, if you've ever put together like a really crap piece of furniture, you know, and like the pieces, there'll be like 1/8-inch gaps in between them, and you're like, wow, you know, I guess this is what you get for 99 bucks. But if you've ever put together a really nice piece of furniture, and like all the tolerances are about perfect and it all snaps together just right so you can't even slide a piece of paper in between, right? That's what we're talking about here, right? Better grade of machinery to build better quality bikes that just plain work better, okay? And all that's going to cost money. So of course, finance, right? Funding for the above, HR, maybe you need to hire new employees for, you know, engineering, right, to develop the new bicycles, or quality assurance, or process design, right? Maybe you need a new crowd of people for that. You get the idea. So all of these things, the functional areas, they're going to have their part to play in supporting this big overall strategy, right? They could go off and do something totally different, like HR could say, you know what? We're going to try to save the organization money by not really interviewing anybody and just kind of hiring the first person who walks in who has a good resume, right? That's not really going to support the goal. That might support HR's local goals of, you know, operating within budget, but it's not going to support the overall goal of producing higher quality bicycles. Okay, so there is a difference. Now, building on that, anytime you do some big strategy shift, it's almost inevitably going to require some kind of changes to information systems, right? Because information systems, businesses don't build them to be fun little toys. Businesses build them to be useful, right? They're useful tools that fulfill actual business needs. And those needs only become clear when the strategy gets developed. When the organizational strategy gets developed, then the functional strategies get devised to follow it, and then the functional areas they have new needs for information, right? So for example, in the case we had before we talked about marketing, maybe they need a better customer relationship management system, right? Maybe they need something that has that information. Or maybe the quality process in manufacturing, maybe that needs some kind of automation or better tracking of quality data, right? All that sort of stuff. Maybe HR needs an update to their database system to add on a new set of skills to be managed by employees and all the processes that track what employees have learned. So you'll often see system development being a natural consequence of strategic planning. So the typical sequence, number one, evaluate the situation, look at the internal and external factors. Then, in light of that, choose your organizational strategy, figure out what you're going to do. Once you've figured out the organizational strategy, the functional areas are going to find their own strategies to support it. And finally, the information systems are going to be built that support those functional strategies. Okay? Now, we'll come back on Thursday. We'll talk a little bit more specifics about Amazon and their strategy. But this is a good break point, and I'll see you all on Thursday.